there should be a preparation given to the Biden team. Should he be the winner, not if he's going to be the winner, but should he be the winner, make sure he's prepared on day one. And that's something that the transition process should allow to have happen.
All right, that was Andy Card, President Bush Jr.'s former chief of staff, co-wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal with John Podesta, who served in that role for Bill Clinton, saying that enough is enough. We should be making way for a smooth transition to Joe Biden, if for no other reason than he should be prepared January 20th and have plenty of time for a transition that is not being afforded him now, including intelligence briefings and the like that are very important to have. No doubt my next guest agrees. Jeff Flake, the former Arizona senator who had supported Joe Biden in this effort, joins us right now. Senator, thank you for doing so. Very good to have you on a Saturday.
Good to be here.
Senator, as you know, I mean, Republicans and Democrats are increasingly calling, at the very least, no matter what the president thinks of this race and whether it was fair to him, that Joe Biden is owed these intelligence briefings, that it's important that a delay in getting to them back in 2000 with the Bush-Gore recount might have left us vulnerable to what happened 8 months later, of course, on 9/11. Do you agree with that?
I agree that it's important. I can't speculate as to whether that would have made a difference with 9/11, but it's just the right thing to do. I think responsible administrations will make sure that responsible outgoing administrations make sure that that happens. So I hope it does, and I expect that it will in the coming weeks. It's been, a long haul to get here, but I assume that by next week, most will agree.
I know you had a very tempestuous relationship with the president, and then he would return the salvo with you. I am wondering now, though, how you think he will comport himself if his options run out. Do you think that he will graciously concede the election to Joe Biden and will attend the inauguration of Joe Biden?
I don't know. All indications are that he's going to ride this out. So I'm not sure what he's going to do, but I think the rest of us need to realize that this now says more about us and how we handle it than it does about the president. But I can't. I would think that by the time the inauguration rolls around, that he'll be there. But who knows? Who knows?
I understand, Senator. Indications he's sort of paving a way for a 2024 run. That would be certainly historically unusual. Grover Cleveland did that, and our only two-term non-concurrent term president. I remember covering that election, but no, I'm joking there. But what do you think of that and the likelihood of that?
I don't think that the president is going to have an outsized influence. He will have an influence going forward. But once you lose the trappings of office and the levers of power, and then in particular, Trumpism kind of relies on a certain amount of swagger that you lose when you lose an election. And so I just can't see. I mean, some people are thinking that he's going to be the 900-pound gorilla that's going to determine every Senate race and every House race in the next 4 years. I just don't see that. I do think he will exert some influence. The fact that there are rallies going around the country right now, I think, indicate that. But that's hard to maintain when you lose, like I said, the trappings of office and the levers of power.
Indeed, in Grover Cleveland's case, he had won the popular vote, so he could make a stake that he was robbed or whatever in battling for a third bid for office. But leaving that aside, you mentioned the force of nature he is. I'm not quoting you exactly here, in the party itself, and how he could decide on its next nominee. The Trumpism isn't dead, and then that's still, and the supporters he has, including all of these showing up, Senator, in Washington today to express their support and the legal fight to continue. What do you make of that and the influence that these supporters will have on the party?
Well, he will have influence, no doubt. Like I said, the fact that these rallies are going on, a lot of people attending them. He had a lot of support. He got 72 million votes. But having said that, Trumpism, it's more of an attitude, really. It relies a lot on grievance politics, and depending on where both of the parties that are governing, that are in the Senate and in the House, in the White House, depending on how Republicans and Democrats comport themselves and move forward, if they do, reach toward the center, then I think people will kind of tire of the old politics that we experience right now, and they'll go more back to their regular lives. And so I think that to see politics as kind of entertainment, as we've seen it over the past little while, particularly during COVID, when the sports were down for a while and everything else, it was politics that we all turned to. But I think that will fade. I hope it does. As a conservative, I want politics to be steady and civil and boring, and that would be nice.
Senator, your name has been mentioned oftentimes in a potential Biden cabinet. Would you be interested in a role?
I don't expect that to happen. Obviously, I love this country. I will serve in whatever way I can, but I don't expect that to happen.
There have been precedents. Chuck Hagel, for one, defense secretary, with President Obama. So it's not unthinkable. Right?
No. It happens more often than not, frankly. But
right.
But whether I would be chosen, that's what I question.
Okay, Senator Flake, thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it, sir.
Glad to be on. Thank you.